rings that can fit on Weaver can go on Picatinny. Rings that can go on Picatinny may not necessarily be able to fit on your particular Weaver rail. Is there any issue with getting the Weaver set of rings or a set of rings that are compatible with your Weaver rails, even though you may not even have any Weaver rails at the moment, or maybe you have one, but it's not the one that you intend to actually mount these rings on? Like, is there any issue with it's like, okay, I have rings that can go on Weaver rails, but I'm going to mount them on a Picatinny rail? Any problem?
Regulators, mount up. That's right, everybody. We're going to talk about Riflescope mounting solutions and how they work. Ryan, what was that? That wasn't my best. Do you know what that's from?
No.
Warren G.
Buffett.
G-Funk, 90s rap. Nothing's. Nate Dogg, rest in peace, 2011. Nothing.
We've talked about the negative influence that rap has had on your life, and I thought
It's been nothing but positive.
It
What
is
do you mean
not
negative.
Mark,
I'm fine.
does he freestyle to you? And
He has occasionally.
it's always
That's kind of a special.
it's always violence.
Well, but he
It's what
comes
rhymes.
from an
I think-
era. He comes from an era. East Coast versus West Coast. There was a lot of violence.
Yep.
You were from the east side of the West Coast.
I lived
right?
in the suburbs.
You were on the east side of the West Coast. So how do you
one of the highest
live
consumer.
with how do you live with yourself?
I was born on the east side of the West Coast. Yes.
Yeah, I know. What a juxtaposition.
We're getting Mark slowly migrated over to metal. I'm working a lot of Mastodon and Tool into his diet.
I haven't listened to any of it yet.
Yeah, we'll get you there.
So
I'm
when
just
you say
saying,
you're
I
working
was-
it in and he hasn't listened to any of it yet, you're just still in
He'll
a
be stuck.
suggestion
He'll be
phase.
stuck in a truck with me eventually.
I did say that we could do like a music swap where we take the time to listen to evaluate each other's genre preferences of music.
I will have nothing to bring to the table.
That's fine.
I was from the suburbs. That's like probably the largest user group or whatever of a consumer of gangster rap. Okay, agree to disagree. Can we agree that we're going to talk about Riflescope mounts and solutions and how they work?
I'm in.
Yeah, brother.
We've got, if you're watching on YouTube, and I guess if you're not, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rifles on the table, all with different ring base combinations. Some of the rings have kind of an integrated base.
Now I understand. Why
No wrong answer, and the right answer might be it just depends on your rifle
Yes, or preference.
or preference. Yeah.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
is a hilarious mix of rifles, in my opinion.
It's a bit eclectic.
They're all
There's nothing wrong
mostly,
with it. There's nothing that isn't actually like most Wisconsin deer hunters' safes right here. But that's why I find it a little bit funny because we have steeped in tradition, passed down from generation to generation, and then we have plastic.
a little bit newer.
Yeah.
But not crazy. There's nothing crazy in here. This is
No,
all
no, no,
fairly.
no. There's nothing exotic per se.
Yeah.
Well, there's a 338-06 on the table. It's a little...
The cartridge is a little bit,
Must have missed that.
So this is the one. Ryan's like, which one should we do? And you had brought this in. I'm like, dude, you've talked about this rifle 100 times. You never hunt with it, so we might as well see it. Am I wrong?
Sorry.
I wish you would have brought the cartridge in. I kind of wanted to see it. I mean, I guess I probably know what it looks like, but with the little...
listen, this isn't a cartridge stock, but 338.6 is a lead balloon.
Wrongfully or rightfully so?
Wrongfully so.
I was asking you about that 338 Federal again this
Yeah,
morning.
we got them, people.
You didn't get me,
We'll get
but
them.
I'm intrigued enough to ask about it
Yeah.
again, even though I don't think I'll go with it.
Seems got.
We'll get to that later. You're correct, Mark. We've got a smattering of mounting solutions and explanations behind all of them.
Should we just start closest to furthest to us and just kind of run through them, or did you
Do
have...
we need to do any of our administrative things before we get going? Like a mounting solution.
Do some administration, Jim.
Well,
You're
and-
good at that.
Well, the reason I was going to bring this up is that we've talked about this many times in other episodes, but in any time where we're specifically calling out mounting solutions, it's important to note the fact that one could argue, and perhaps argue quite convincingly, that it is in fact the most important piece of the entire puzzle. Because without a mounting solution, you have no means, first off, of even attaching the optic to your firearm, which is helping you even aim at the thing that you're trying to shoot in the first place in a very precise manner. And then further, without a, oh yeah, Mark's good looking out.
And
further, without a quality solution installed correctly, the bases, rings, mounts, whatever you call them, can be all the difference between a reliable and unreliable setup.
Mm-hmm. You are correct.
It's the core of the gun. Like you can, you could go to the gym and do leg day every day, and you could do arms every day. But if you got no core, there's nothing to you. You can't do anything.
You need the middle.
It all attaches via this intermediary point. It's very, 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 very important. And too many people cheap out on it because they spend almost all their budget on the gun.
Yep.
They spend what's left over on the scope, and then they have pocket sand left to spend on the rings and bases, and that's what they wind up doing. And then they wonder why they're having issues getting things mounted or whatever, or their eye relief isn't right, they can't get comfortable behind the gun, cheek welds all screwed up, whatever it is.
It doesn't end up working for them. They burn a bunch of ammo, multiple trips to the range.
Right.
They blame the rifle or the optic. Has that ever happened, Ryan?
It does. Number one reason we see rifle scopes come back to us for misbehavior is related specifically to mounting solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Either low quality, improper selection, improper installation.
This must be very near and dear to your heart because you and your team do a range certification program where when a customer is experiencing unexplainable issues,
yes,
they will send in their rifle scope and we will then test it out. So we don't always just do it by request. It's just sometimes something that we do to ensure that everything is working properly. But we'll test it out on our own firearms, mount it up in our own mounting solutions properly, and we'll test to see if that scope is functioning or not functioning. And the overwhelming majority of the time, the scope is functioning just fine, and then it's an explanation with the customer or a conversation about mounting solutions. Sometimes ammo, sometimes other things.
Sure.
But I mean, it seems 90% of the time, if not more, I'm being a bit conservative by saying 90.
Many thousands of executions of this process. I know the total failure too. It's abysmal percentages.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is scopes that we've gotten in where it's like, oh yeah, the scope is really the problem. Teensy, tiny, little itty bitty, tiny percentage.
0.000 and change.
Right, of the entire
range
thing that's come back. And
that
anyway, a lot goes into this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a matter, sadly, of just buying the scope and just slapping it on and going. There's some care that needs to be taken. But we're going to talk about that because it doesn't also need to be the most complicated thing in the world. Just a few things, take into consideration and do right, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yes.
I like it.
There's our admin.
No, I think that was, I think because we've talked about it before, because we work here, we eat, sleep, breathe these things, it's easy to make an assumption like, oh yeah, like this is just, you assume that that's like the pre-work's been done.
Yeah.
And for probably a lot of folks that listen to the podcast, it has been, but very important to cover that.
Absolutely it is.
Now can we?
Yes, we can. I was also looking over there because I have no idea where my dog is. Where's the black one? Oh, there she is.
Okay.
She got a couple pets in there. She's like, all right, I'll take a break.
Yeah.
That's like...
They don't always show up to the podcast studio, but when they do, it's usually a matter of, where are they?
Well, they're so quiet.
They are quiet.
That's great.
Ninjas.
All right. Let's go. Okay, so where were you going to start, Mark? Were you going to start with the on the classic side of things? It almost seemed like you were airing that direction.
That is it kind of is structured right now. Well, technically, Picatinny's oldest. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Should we start with the most common?
Shooter's choice. Go ahead.
We're going to start with the most commons. That's what we're going to do. in order of commonality. So I have here Sawyer's Wisconsin Special. This is his model 760 chambered in 308 Winchester.
Chambered in left hand.
It is left-handed safety.
And you can see the cheek comb is on the right side of the gun.
He is. This is a proud rifle.
Chambered in left.
And I'm gonna say this, a little note on the rifle. I had to zero this the other day for a fun.
What cartridge is that left?
I had to zero this the other day for a fun little project that we're working on. This rifle shoots exceptionally well.
That's good.
It's in good shape.
It is.
It's pretty.
It's basket weave, press checkered. Man, it's classic. Adorning the top of this 760's receiver is a one-piece weaver rail. And we've all, if we're in the rifle realm, have heard of weaver. Usually they come in two flavors, one piece or two. And very, very simple mount. They've got a facilitation of a clamp that will bite onto the sides and bottom of the rail, and then a recoil lug pocket or cross slot that will accommodate the recoil lug or through bolt from the mounting system. So I've got a set of our Pro Series rings here, which are Weaver compatible, and they would otherwise just clamp right on at one of those positions on the rail in which that cross slot is present. And so whether it's a one piece or a two piece doesn't really matter. They just bite on there and clamp. This is a very, very common, very classic, and very affordable mounting solution. They're durable. They're, as I mentioned, very easy to come by. So you go to most gun shops, sporting goods stores, etc. They're going to have a weaver solution or likely to have a weaver solution. And many rings on the market from most rifle ring manufacturers, mount manufacturers, are going to have weaver compatibility, at least in the hunting space. In the tactical precision space, it's a bit of a different story, but weaver compatibility in a ring solution is very common. So this is something you're very likely to bump into when you're out gun shopping.
Now, weaver compatibility versus Picatinny compatibility. So if you look at a weaver rail and a Picatinny rail side by side, you can tell some differences, but you can understand the fact pretty quickly that they're basically doing a similar function.
They're reminiscent of one another,
they
for
are.
Sure.
The dovetail groove that runs along the sides is what your ring clamps onto and keeps your ring located up and down. And then the recoil lug that or the slot that the recoil lug from your ring drops into is what keeps it located fore and aft. And the Picatinny rail has that. It just usually has more flexibility, being that it usually has more cross slots through it in terms of where you can mount those rings. It does seem like weaver doesn't usually have cross slots going the full length. Like in this case, it's a one-piece weaver rail. It doesn't usually have cross slots going the entire length of the rail, I've found.
Sometimes you get a handful of them.
Yeah, but they're not always like, there's like maybe two on the back side and then one, two, or three on the front side.
And there's no cadence or pattern in the spacing.
Right.
So on this particular model, there's just two, as Jim had mentioned, a lot of two-piece systems. You'll see usually two on the back to allow you one or two different ring positions, and then maybe one on the front. And on those that do have multiple slots, they're generally kind of, I'm not going to say random because there's thought put into where the slot placement is, but they're not a standard and they're not evenly gapped.
Yeah.
So while they do offer a very robust, affordable, and rather simplistic mounting interface, they can be somewhat limiting. So in the case of this 760, I have two positions, or actually, I mean, realistically, I only have one position in which the rings can be mounted on the gun, on the rail. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see that that's it.
There's a fixed spacing that is you're stuck to in terms of how far apart your front ring and your back ring are mounted to the gun, which can be limiting.
Yes. So if I have an optic that has a short eye relief or a shorter mounting surface on the tube, like that's it. The only movement that I have for my optic is fore and aft until I hit some sort of vertical feature on the scope, like the magnification ring assembly, the objective taper, the turret housing. In this case, it wouldn't be a concern. Modern rifle scopes are getting shorter, and so that can present a challenge. An older rifle scope, like of this rifle's vintage, you wouldn't really have to worry about that. You'd have all this tube real estate that you could slide an optic.
Long.
Yeah.
Remember the original Viper 4-12?
Oh,
I was thinking about that very scope.
I got one.
That's one of the only optics in our line that you could reasonably mount on a Ruger No. 1.
A tube a mile long.
Yeah. That was a great scope, too. Optically, that thing was a sweetheart.
Killed me a mule deer with that scope.
Did you?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
It's really interesting how when we started talking about that, you said kilt me a mule deer, like with a T.
Oh, that was just for effect. Firing for effect.
No, I know. So it's just, I like that that's the effect that the Viper 4-12 brings you.
Yeah. It kind of puts you in that mindset.
It does.
Ryan, dimensionally, how does a Weaver rail compare to a Picatinny rail?
Sure.
And are rings always able to go on both?
It could be generally stated that a ring that fits a Weaver will fit a Picatinny. A ring that fits a Picatinny may not fit a Weaver. And so from a dimensional standpoint, if you were to like cross-section the rail perpendicular to its length, and you were to look at the points on the far width of the dovetail, if I'm describing that correctly. That was a garbage explanation.
I know what you meant.
They look much the same. Depending on your Picatinny rail style, you may have a flat top to it, or it may be milled out here, and you have some relief there, just as almost more of a lightening procedure than anything functional. But that part will likely be identical. The heights on most Weavers, like overall from contact point of the firearm to the top datum up here, will generally be lower than a Picatinny rail.
Okay.
They are usually a lower profile looking on top of a gun.
Yeah.
Like before you put a scope or any rings on it, you'll just notice that they're usually lower profile. Picatinny rails sit up a little bit higher.
And that is part of the Picatinny specification. They've got to be tall enough to accommodate different types, like to be true Picatinny, which is a challenge that I think any mount manufacturer or optic manufacturer would face with firearms manufacturers incorporating designs that look Picatinny, walk Picatinny, talk Picatinny, but are not Picatinny.
You remember the Ruger American, original Ruger American Gen 1, that rail that came on top of that thing? Looked Picatinny.
Yep.
It wasn't.
Not Picatinny. Nope. And that's challenging from the mount interface with the mounting system, or like the ring interface. A good example would be like Ruger's PC carbine, phenomenal little gun, has a Picatinny-esque rail on top. But if you take a Picatinny adaptable system like a UH-1, the two are incompatible.
You can't rock it on there, right? Because there's not enough. It's not high enough for the quick release mechanism to be able to rock on.
Yeah.
And when I say rock on, it's like you literally have to start it on the right side and then move it over to the left side.
Yep.
And yeah, when there's not enough of that
kind of
offset, when there's not enough of that offset, then you're just sort of, you can't get the mount on.
So dimensionally, they're very similar. Usually the discrepancy resides in height, and then of course that lug width, or that cross slot width and cross slot shape. Curiously, with Weaver, you'll see Weavers that have a square cut out like this one is, so that there's like a 90 degree, a flat, a 90 degree. You'll also see radiused or dished.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a vestigial or leftover from when a lot of rings did not employ a recoil lug that was actually like machined into the ring. Whereas like on these Pro Series rings that we have here, there's a square notch or embossment that protrudes downward into the what would be the recoil lug pocket on this. On ring systems that have a dish or a radius in there, sometimes these can be incompatible. I also have found that
those are for the old rings that just used the through bolt as the recoil lug and also the fastening device or whatever.
So I've noted there are varying depths of that cross slot. So you can have a shallow square, you can have a deep square, you can have a narrow square, you can have a wide square, and then you can have a radius cross slot as well. That would require a round bolt to go underneath there. So there is a little bit of ambiguity in the Weaver's cross slot. The exterior dimension, the width of the rail, that'll all be the same. The contact points underneath the rail where the clamp mechanism of the ring hooks to, if you will, and then bites to on the opposing side, that's all fairly constant. But that cross slot can bite you.
Real quick, Weaver rails, we've obviously just gone into the fact that not all Weaver rails are created equal.
Sure.
Earlier on, you mentioned that not all Weaver rails are created equal in the fact that some are two-piece and some are one-piece. Now, two-piece rails, it used to be kind of an easy thing. It was just like, we used to say, like, yeah, don't go two-piece rails. Of course, now you see some of these bolt guns that are trying to be really lightweight, and they actually have like a monoblock receiver, and the rail has been machined in the receiver. And there's like all kinds of precision tolerances and all that stuff going on. So you sort of have less of an issue. Of course, you do still run into one of the things that I'm sure we'll get into, but we've generally said avoid the two-piece rails, especially when it comes to Weaver rails. And that's simply because of the fact that a Riflescope is a straight tube. And it relies quite a bit on the integrity of its tube being maintained. And if you put outside stresses on the Riflescope's tube, and modern Riflescopes are made out of aluminum, and that's a great material to make Riflescopes out of. I mean, I can't think of any steel scopes anymore. Not even like military grade, whatever you want to say, scopes. It's all aluminum. But it can, experience sort of a deformity effect if you mash down on your rings, which I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of when you tighten them around the scope's tube, or if there is a misalignment between your two bases. So if you have a two-piece rail and you don't have that one single rail going down the top of your rifle that is straight, you have two pieces, and now there's the potential for them to be slightly misaligned from one another, and then your rings go on top, and now your rings are slightly misaligned. They're not, the circles or the holes are not concentric to one another, and so they, when they get tightened down, can put stress on your tube.
Yeah.
And so that's why we say, I don't think we're opposed to a one-piece Weaver. Like here it is on Sawyer's rifle. It works just fine. Of course, we would like if these Weaver rails are maybe a little bit more, standardized in some of their features and also allowed for more flexibility like the Picatinny rail offers. Like Sawyer's just had one ring position. But definitely if you're going to have it, try to go for one piece, right?
Good rule of thumb. I think a lot of that is also contingent on the arm itself. So, or your setup practice. So I don't love a two-piece base and then ring setup. I'd rather have a ring base combination in a two-piece format. Most of that,
like this guy right here.
Yeah. Most of the time though, I end up dressing those rings up. But just for exactly the reasons that you had described. So
by lapping them.
Yeah.
Right? Here's what you're referring to by dressing them up. Yeah.
Tolerance stacking between the holes drilled in the top of the firearm itself to accept the base or the ring system, and then any tolerancing issues between ring to ring is a real thing. And, you can... I'm very picky about it. I'm very picky about the customers that come into the shop. I mean, if you brought a scope into us to mount up, which we do every day, any of the guys that are going to do that, they're like checking that immediately. Like, how is the fitment here? Do I have binding? Do I have twisting? If there is, we're going to take care of that. So yeah, a two-piece system, like a two-piece Weaver, for instance, can leave a little bit to be desired. You can fix it. You can amend it if you have the facilities and the tools to do so. But a one-piece does help sort that out, or at least, like, let's say it's really wonked out. Like we've seen this in the very recent past. We have guns come in almost every day for mounting solutions, and we'll get a rifle in, new or old, and the holes on the top of the receiver are not aligned.
Yeah.
So typically there's 4, sometimes there's 3, depending on what kind of gun it is. And so think about the centers of of each one of those holes. Typically on a bolt action rifle, you're going to have what we call a rear bridge and a front bridge. There's going to be 2 in each. So indicate the centers of each of those holes and then run a line like straight through the middle of them. Usually we see the front is drifting off of the center line. And if you put a one-piece base on there, even before you attach the scope, you get an immediate indicator that something is amiss because you anchor one or more of the screws in the rear and you go to the front and you're like, oh, shoot, the holes don't line up.
Yeah.
I can't drive a hole in there. And then we know even before we put a scope into the ring solution and then put torque to it that, hey, something is amiss. This could potentially goof up the scope. It will definitely complicate the zeroing process. Even if you were to get everything snapped together, there's undue torsion in that system at that point.
Yeah. Or there's a scope that's not pointing directly down the center of the bore of the rifle.
Jimmy Jordan and I had that one yesterday.
Yep.
So, and the one piece gives you a good indication of that. If we throw a 2-piece system on there, you'd never know until you put the rings on, you put the scope in there.
And you try to go slide the scope back and forth before you torque it down. You're like, why is this?
Yeah. And that is an inherent risk of a 2-piece system. And you can't fault the base. You kind of have to fault the rifle. You really can't fault the ring either. It is really the rifle's, what we'll call misalignments, now manifesting while you go to put it together. So a one piece is a good security check too. I also like them because they're more rigid, like inherently, right? Mm-hmm. There's a spine running between both islands, and that can be a good thing. Yeah. So Weavers, very economical, generally very reliable. Leave some things to be desired, as you had mentioned, Jim. There's a little bit of ambiguity on that recoil lug pocket style, whether it's a squared notch or a radius notch, and then that unusual random spacing, it seems, on the recoil lugs, or excuse me, the cross slot placement. Anyhow, I would say it would have one of the more limiting interfaces for a shooter who would need to move an optic foreraft, especially in the case of this one piece as shown on this Model 760, where you really only have one spot for the front ring to go, one spot for the rear ring to go.
But I do think like you could be like, well, why would you ever do that? Why would you not just get, if you want a one piece, get a pick rail? But that height component can be really important.
Big time. And cost, right? So a one piece Weaver base, probably like $15. And that's not to inspire cheap, but they're just low cost. I mean,
there's not a lot to it.
No.
So
simple extrusion with 4 holes punched in it.
Height, cost, and here's the deal. I'm just going to say it. Sawyer's gun would look weird with a pick rail on top.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Aesthetics.
It wouldn't look right.
I agree.
It looks better with a Weaver rail on top.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we've compared Weaver and Picatinny here a lot.
Yep.
And so the natural kind of gear shift would be to go into Picatinny a little bit. A much more standardized shape, dimension, specification, all that. There is some variability in it. Maybe sometimes you got steel ones, you got aluminum ones, you got ones that are sort of scalloped out down the middle for a lightweightness, if you will. One of the things that I was going to ask Ryan is, like you said, rings that can fit on Weaver can go on Picatinny. Rings that can go on Picatinny may not necessarily be able to fit on your particular Weaver rail. Is there any issue with getting the Weaver set of rings or a set of rings that are compatible with your Weaver rails, even though you may not even have any Weaver rails at the moment, or maybe you have one, but it's not the one that you intend to actually mount these rings on? Like, is there any issue with it's like, okay, I have rings that can go on Weaver rails, but I'm going to mount them on a Picatinny rail? Any problem?
Generally, no.
Yeah.
No. So like our Pro Series rings, this is a great example. Pro Series rings we made as an upgrade to our original Viper rings, which were a fine ring, but we just like these better.
Yeah.
And then to also offer a very robust and concentric solution to the shooter who didn't want to step all the way up to the precision match rings, which are very Cadillac, very, very, very sharp rings. These are a very, very close second. They're much more affordable. They are Weaver compatible because we knew, like, there's not a duty grade component or need to this, right? You don't you don't need to put a set of precision match rings on a Remington 760, perhaps, because they're quite expensive, and they are like a true duty grade ring, precision.
Well, they're a little chunkier and a little bit more, a little heavier as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we wanted something that was aesthetically pleasing, so it wasn't going to look tactical necessarily on your classic 760, for instance. We wanted something more affordable, a little bit lighter weight because this is a hunting rifle. But we did want the shooter who said, hey, I have a long-range rifle that I'm putting together. I do have budget constraints. I maybe can't afford a potentially $200 pair of rings. Do you have another offering that's still going to hold me secure for a lifetime of use? Is compatible with a Picatinny interface, which many of these rifles have, and boom, enter your Pro Series rings. So dual compatibility, Weaver and Picatinny. So it goes on there very nicely. There is a recoil lug that actually protrudes from the bottom of that of that ring itself, that then indexes and corresponds nicely with the Picatinny rail that's on there, and that's a kind of a paramount and prerequisite for success, a paramount feature prerequisite for success for tying into a Picatinny rail system. That lug is going to engage the cross slot. That's going to prevent your ring from walking forward and hold things tight and secure. As you had mentioned, Jim, that reverse compatibility failure from a Picatinny rail to a Weaver generally comes from recoil lug width and depth. It being very and fairly stringently controlled on a Picatinny rail itself. Like if you look at the Picatinny spec, pocket width and pocket depth is X plus minus Y.
Yeah.
And so when you see a ring solution that is a Picatinny ring, like it's made for it, that recoil lug embossment is typically wider, this way, typically longer across the span of the ring, and then typically taller, so that it engages as much of that recoil lug pocket on the pick rail as possible.
Which is why, and kind of what I was getting at with my question too, is which is why when you test fit a ring on top of a Picatinny rail that is dual compatibility, like the Pro ring, you drop that in, and you're going to notice that there is some fore and aft, forward and back, wiggle room in it before you've tightened down the ring to the base. Okay, so the ring at this point is just completely loose on it. So, like, I guess I remember when we were going through the development of the Pro rings, and we had like in the precision match rings, there was a period of time where we had some precision match rings that were Weaver, like PMR-Weaver.
Yep.
And then we had just the regular precision match rings, which were Picatinny.
Yep.
And we were thinking like, well, are we going to have to do that with the Pro rings? Because these are going to be much more of like the bread and butter rings that we're going to have in the lineup. A lot more people are going to buy them. They're going to go on a lot more hunting rifles rather than just these precision, big old PRS guns, duty guns, whatever.
A really like a wide range of rifles.
Yeah, and so I remember that there were some people that were in this camp of thinking that we need to have ones that are Picatinny specific, because if I have a Picatinny rail gun, this precision thing, duty grade, whatever, then I'm not going to want to have a ring on there that's like also compatible with Weaver, because maybe that's somehow like less.
Yeah.
But then there was also people who were like, it really doesn't matter. Really, like to have, there are entities who will look for a ring that is Picatinny spec, and that's why people make rings that are Picatinny spec, okay? But for the general population, it really doesn't matter if your ring is dual compatible. You're not losing anything by having a ring that can go on Weaver, but you're using it on a Picatinny rail. And that really just comes down to, the way that the gun recoils. That recoil lug is preventing the rifle scope from walking forward, because rifles, when they recoil, snap back, and an object at rest wants to stay at rest, so the rifle scope for a period of time is trying to stay where it is, with the rifle scooching underneath it backward. And so therefore you would end up, if there were no recoil lug, with the rifle scope eventually walking its way forward a little bit, and you would notice my zero is somehow shifting, or things weird are going on. If you index this recoil lug prior to tightening it down to the rail against the, forward, against the slot, boom.
Done.
Any potential worry that you would have had is now completely negated, because now it is completely mechanically butted up against that front recoil lug, and or that front of that slot. You're not going to have any issues. So that's kind of what I'm getting at is there's no issue with the dual compatibility.
And I've heard people criticize narrow lug, like dual compatibility rings being put on a Picatinny interface because, well, now I've got all this air gap in the back. Well, if we unpack that and we really think about it, it's like, okay, if you wanted to sort that out, your recoil lug would need a plus minus nothing relative to the Picatinny's width.
Right. Which even Picatinny rings don't have a tolerance of 0.
Yeah. And like, I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but you'd probably be building your pair of rings for the base. And I don't know that it's going to give you anything because we're really not worried about that ring migrating rearward.
Yeah.
Unless you're mounting your scope backwards on a reverse recoiling gun, which doesn't exist. So there's nothing there that really is to fault for a slightly narrower lug that is going to be reverse compatible with a Weaver base. Because as you said, Jim, you buttress that up against that vertical face on the recoil lug pocket, and the moment it makes contact, the moment that it has its maximum security, after you torque.
And that's where you tighten it up. Yeah.
That's it. Super simple. What I really do love about Picatinny, as this Weatherby Mark V has on it, is, as you had mentioned very early on, flexibility. And we're not talking about, wiggly wobbly. We're talking about like versatility, flexibility, and mounting position. So every one of these cross slots that are on here can accommodate this ring. So I can, in increment, move the ring fore and aft about 1/4 of an inch, actually slightly less, to accommodate unique rifle scope geometry. So if we have a short scope that has very limited, quote, rail estate on its mounting surface.
Nice.
Or if I have a shooter that has,
I like that.
patent pending. If I have a shooter that has, a length of pull requirement that's very specific, or just a body build that dictates when they interface with a rifle, they're going to hold it in a very specific way. The Picatinny is going to allow us the most forgiveness for optics placement. So long as we don't run into an objective bell on the front end or a magnification ring on the back end, which you will generally accommodate with ring height or overall rail length. So there's almost nothing you can't sort out on a bolt gun with a appropriately heighted ring and a Picatinny rail.
Yep.
Another advantage of the Picatinny rail is you can get variants of it with different degrees of cant built into it.
Yep.
Ooh, Mark, way to go.
Yes,
Oftentimes
Mark.
we see, 20 degrees?
20 MOA.
20 MOA, sorry.
20 degrees would be one of them BLR boys.
You know what? Put this in your back pocket. 1/3 degree cant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know why I said that. I think I said degrees earlier, and then it was,
it happens.
That band 98 Degrees? You like them, Ryan. You had that poster in your bedroom when I came to visit you. Anyway.
At his mom's house.
20 MOA rail. Sometimes you see 30, I think.
30?
40.
Yep.
Yeah.
50.
Not often over 40, like just that you can just add to cart. That's usually kind of like more custom stuff when guys are going. I mean, some of those super long range guys that are breaking records have like over 100 MOA.
Yeah.
I mean.
So let's cover the why behind a person who might want that and a person who maybe might think they need that, but they actually don't.
Yeah. So the premise behind a canted rail, as we would call it, we're going to be canting down as we move toward the muzzle. So the back of the rail is higher than the front of the rail.
So does this one have a 20 MOA rail?
No, this is a 0.
Oh, okay.
But this rifle in particular has a lower rear bridge height than its front. So it is thicker in the back than it is in the front, but it's set up.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I thought I was seeing something there.
Okay.
You are seeing something. So why would we want a sloped rail? And again, sloped down toward the muzzle. So taller in the back, shorter in the front. The idea here is when we put the optic on there and we zero the rifle, we somewhat trick the rifle scope into believing that it zeroes lower in its travel range than toward the center, maximizing the amount of upward travel distance that we have internally with the rifle scope. So usually for most optics manufacturers, and definitely from us, when you get a rifle scope out of the box, brand new from us, it's set at what we call our mechanical center. So if you had, we'll just make up easy numbers here.
Unless it was in the store in a display and some jackwagon came in and just started spinning all those turrets. Yeah, that happens.
So let's say for easy numbers, your scope has 100 minutes of travel, which is a lot. You would have 50 up, 50 down, 50 left, 50 right. And this is like we're using the Acme scope designation because there are certainly optics that have different setups. But 50 down, 50 up, 50 left, 50 right. You put it on a 20 MOA base. If your rifle was perfectly square,
That's the key here.
Yeah, which I've never, in the many thousands of rifle scopes that I've mounted on rifles, I've never found a square gun. Not one time. Not the most premier high-end bolt rifle ever is perfectly square.
It's the original reason why turrets exist.
Yeah, correct.
Because, I mean, since the dawn of guns, they weren't square.
Correct.
It's just a thing.
Yep. So if you had a 20 MOA rail on, you would have usably 80 MOA of vertical. Did I do that right?
70.
70 MOA of vertical travel. Yeah, because 100 less, or 50
plus 20.
Plus 20. Yeah. You'd have 70 MOA of vertical travel. I went to public school and I drank a lot of cheap beer in college.
It's okay.
You'd have 70 usable MOA up from your zero position, assuming your rifle is perfectly square, leaving you a little cushion on the bottom, which you don't necessarily want to max out your travel.
No.
Yes.
Unless you plan on running.
I said no. You said we meant the same
we
thing.
were meaning the
said,
exact same thing, but yeah, somehow in our minds it worked out as a no and a yes.
Right. So we give you a little cushion on the bottom. You don't want to max it out unless your expressed intent is shooting only at the long range. Where I see this kind of bite some guys in the butt, though, is there's a lot of talk over what a shooter needs to have to be successful. And I've read if you're not putting a 20 MOA rail on there, like you're screwed, for hunting whitetails in, Wisconsin or wherever. I mean,
LOL.
The idea behind a 20 MOA rail expressed is shooting long range. And so on a 308, which I think they just hit 100 yards and they fall straight out of the sky, or 800 yards, they fall straight down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you called up and said, hey, I'm putting together a 308, I'm like, okay, you going to hunt with it? You going to shoot long range? So maybe a little bit of both. I'm like, okay, what's long range for you? Like 400 or 500 yards? Yeah, don't put a 20 MOA rail on that system. That's excessive. You don't need to do it. To a degree, you can actually compromise your perceived optical quality at the shorter distances because now we're biasing the erector tube in the scope and we're looking through the radii and edges of lenses as opposed to the center of the lens. And if the bulk of your shooting is not at long ranges, it's not worth doing.
Yeah.
If you told me, hey, I'm putting a 308 together, my expressed intent is shooting 1,200 yards with it, yes.
It's like putting a hot cam in a V8.
Sure.
Or a Honda Accord if it's your dad. All these people that get into like classics and V8s and hot rods and all that, they're like, I want a hot cam because, I want this thing to rev up to like 8,000 RPM and just be like a high revving machine. But then they turn it on and it does garbage at idle and you can't drive it around town. It's literally undrivable.
Yep.
And they're like, well, what were you going to do with it? They're like, well, I just wanted to drive around to car shows and stuff. And it's like, well, then don't put that in there. It's made for racing. And if you're not going to race it. So it's like people all the time, they think they need what they just think is cool.
That's very true.
And they, and so they're like, why? Or they think that like, well, if I get the thing that's able to shoot really long range, well, then clearly it'll be really good at short range. But then I'm just able to shoot long range. And it's actually like, no, there are trade-offs. You may actually start to have it be worse for your short range stuff that you're going to be doing the bulk of the time. And then only then in the rare case that you do decide to shoot long range, then finally it's useful. But that's like 10%, if not, even less of your use case. And so you've just created a 90% pain in the butt.
So with that said, if you are thinking about a Picatinny rail on your hunting rifle, you might just get a 0. If it's on your target rifle and that target distance is 800 plus yards, have the conversation with a 20, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's use case, right?
Yeah,
a person might be like, yeah, I'm looking to extend my effective range, whatever. I'll make up a scenario. I'm hunting Arizona. Yeah. I might be taking a long shot on a coos deer. I like to practice at those ranges a lot.
Yeah, Well, and 20 really, like we're talking about 20 MOA rails, and really 20 MOA isn't a huge deal.
That one's not crazy.
It's not crazy by any stretch of the imagination. But the thing is, like, okay, if you got a new gun, and this depends on the scope too. Like if you have a scope with a lot of travel, then 20 MOA you're not taking a huge chunk out of the available travel that you would have otherwise had as this cushion to make sure that you can even get your gun zeroed in the first place. But if we're talking about a hunting rifle, some of these hunting rifles, especially when you look at like maybe a slightly older rifle scope with a 1-inch tube with therefore a little bit less room for travel in the turrets, you start to have it where 20 MOA is now a larger percentage of the overall travel. Then you're putting it on a older gun or even a newer gun that's just not super straight. Maybe it shoots really great, but it's not super straight to the rail and the receiver. You're now compromised because you need a lot of adjustment just to get the darn thing zeroed, but you took up 20 MOA of it, a large percentage, just in your rail.
Yeah.
So like there's all these things to consider, and I don't think I have any guns personally with a 20 MOA rail on them. I think I have all just straight 0 MOA rails, and I have on numerous occasions with a number of different rifles of mine shot out to 1,000 yards, a good classic long range distance. And I've never run out of travel until I got, to like 1,100 plus.
Yeah. I have one gun, but remember long ago when we made the 1,000 yards for under $1,000 thing?
Yep. That was a standard Ruger American with 0 MOA rail and a 1-inch 3-9 Diamondback Tactical. Yep.
And we had room to go. Like we could continue dialing. So you often, like you said, Jim, you often don't need it. Use case dependent, but you often don't need it. And I would say if you are shopping that and you're wondering like, will I need it? Give us a call. We'll go through the ballistics. We'll go through the scenarios and we'll look at that. Because very frequently I see good scopes from a lot of different manufacturers like that don't have a ton of travel. So if you have 50 total MOA, which is not uncommon for a hunting scope especially, get thrown on a 20 MOA system, you've got almost nothing left.
I mean, 40% of your travel is now gone.
And especially before we start compounding alignments with the individual rifle, right? And so like Tikkas are a great example. I'm a Tikka fanatic. Every Tikka I have ever put together has almost to the MOA the same alignment requirements, in that if I took an optically centered or mechanically centered rifle scope and put it on a Picatinny rail that was neutral, I would end up turning a specific amount in elevation, a specific amount of windage.
You're not even going to say, are you?
Do you want me to?
I'm curious.
It's 12 and 4. 12 vertical, 4 right.
Very interesting.
And I'll be within about that.
Vertical up?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. If I put a 20 MOA base on a Tikka, I usually end up with 8 usable additional MOA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much of it depends. If
Yeah.
you're trying to shoot a subsonic 300 blackout bolt gun out to 400 yards, maybe
20
you do.
MOA.
Maybe you do need a 20 MOA rail, and in that case, 400 yards is crazy long range, But it's just there's a lot that depends on it. The other thing is too, and I'm sure that we're going to get into this, being that we're talking about mounting solutions, is that sometimes you may not even be shooting long range, but inducing some form of cant into your mounting system, whether through the rail or through the rings, can actually just even, rather than preventing you from getting zeroed, actually maybe what you need in order to get zeroed.
Yep, we've seen that.
But and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it's like playing around. Once you start playing around with cants in your base system, you start asking your base to, what are you doing over there?
I'm just playing with the bolt.
Once you start asking your base system to basically be making up adjustment for you or doing things cant wise, it's kind of a whole bag of worms that you're opening up.
Yeah. And you were talking about the 300 blackout at 400 yards.
Bag of worms. Bag of
sand. Dude, come on.
I think generally it's can of worms, Jim.
It is a can of worms, but can you imagine a bag of worms? It would be so.
It sounds gross, actually.
It does sound worse.
Ruger precision rimfires, 30 MOA standard on the rail.
There you go. Yeah, because it's a rimfire and guys are shooting out to 100 yards and
100
plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. 30 MOA standard.
I mean, a lot of those NRL matches happen within 100 yards.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to go out of your way on one of those guns to get a different rail if you don't want a 30 MOA cant.
Mm-hmm.
The intent of the firearm is a precision trainer or precision long range 22. You pair that with like a Strike Eagle or Venom, like a Venom 3-15 or a Strike Eagle 3-18. Like you could bring that system to 600 yards if you want, if you have a windless day and it's fun. But yeah. So again, I love Picatinny because spectacular versatility in both accepting of ring systems and then flexibility in mounting position for the shooter to accommodate to that. And we won't even talk about like how to mount a scope properly from a fitment standpoint. We've done that quite a bit. But it gives you the most option to do it as perfectly as possible, like hit that perfect tailored fitment. They're robust, and being a one-piece design, number one, and then number two, just the way that they're laid out, they're meant to be a hard use mounting solution. Criticisms I have to them, they're unusually tall in order to adhere to Picatinny spec. I get it. I would say if we're making rails for hunting rifles, first and foremost, we could probably take a few tenths out of there. And they're kind of...
I think some hunting rifles look better with a Picatinny rail.
Yeah, I mean...
And many hunting rifles look better with a weaver rail.
Yeah. They don't... Like, this one technically wouldn't need to be this tall. It could be shorter.
It could be. It could be.
And they can be a little unsightly overall. Like, I just picked up a classic Winchester Model 70. There's no way am I going to put a Picatinny rail on. Gosh, no.
Please don't.
Well, and there's more material there too. So like if you're really trying to build, the lightest weight rig possible,
a
are
lot
we
of
splitting
them?
hairs a little bit? Yeah.
Well, okay. So here's a great case in point. We have this debate all the time. Customers will call up and say like, "Hey, I picked up. I'll pick a really lightweight gun, Christensen Arms Mesa, super lightweight gun. I want to make the lightest system possible. I've already looked at your Razor LHT 3-15. It's the perfect scope. Which rings do I want to get? I want the lightest systems possible. Well, if we go with a one-piece Picatinny rail, typically those are about 4 ounces, and a set of precision match rings come to about 4 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
You have a half a pound in mounting solutions, and that is not insignificant.
No.
There are lighter options out there that do a really good job. You're going to give some stuff up. Like with weight comes spectacular versatility and utility in the design. But they are a little on the pork chop side because there is, as you said, a fair amount of material there that you have to contend with. One other thing I really do like about Picatinny rails, though, and to a degree, you can do this with a weaver. I'm more comfortable with Picatinny just because I have options. I'm not a big fan of quick release rings that interface with them, not because they don't hold zero, but because, like, I bought into them big time when I started doing this kind of stuff, and then I realized I'm never taking my scope off in a hurry. Like, I'm not in the field and like, oh no, I need to quick change my 2.5 to 10 Viper.
You know what I need right now and fast is this scope gone.
It hasn't come up.
Get this out of here.
I need to club that fish.
Bonk them in the head.
Yeah.
Well, you don't go fishing and hunting at the same time.
Everybody knows.
You can. The cool thing about Picatinny, and again, to a degree, Weaver, is they are very accommodating to installation of your rifle scope and then removal, but reinstallation and repeatability. Mm-hmm. So long and contingent as you're putting your rings back in the same slot, which they can be marked, sometimes they're numbered. If you do separate the two, for whatever reason, whether it's transport or cleaning, I know some guys that travel a lot to different countries or long distances on flights, they'll pull their optic off their rifle, carry their optic in their carry-on to make sure that it's, delicately handled, get to their location, put their system back together. They're wagering that the discrepancy observed there could potentially be less than what the baggage handler introduced to like shift in time.
It's always worth a check if you can, but usually it's pretty darn good.
Like without question.
I'd say more often than I'm trying to think of a time where I actually did get somewhere. I'm just like, whoa, what happened? And I'm not finding it personally.
Yeah, agreed. But it's an interesting feel good thing. So I do a lot.
Oh, it's always
yeah.
It's a peace of mind thing.
I do a lot of scope swapping because I'm rifle rich, scope poor, and so Picatinny rail is very useful for doing that. When I was running Picatinny as standard for my personal hunting guns, I had a rail on everything, and then I had an optic that was set up in a set of precision match rings that I would use for load development testing. So I'd put it on there. I'd zero that optic to the rifle. I'd test my loads with it. Off that would go, on my hunting optic would go. Once I made the selection of the load data and figured out what I wanted for a hunting optic. I knew where that optic had to reside on the Picatinny rail to hit my eye relief requirements. Boom, done.
Okay,
very easy.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Boom.
So they're a very excellent mounting system, and again, they're fairly affordable too. We use a lot of EGW rails here at Vortex. Recommend them daily too, and they've got an option from $29.99 to $149.99, depending on what system you need. But there's a lot of other really good ones out there also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else on Picatinny?
No.
I think we covered it.
This is your route to go if you're talking lighter weight, right?
Yeah. So direct to receiver, which there are a few flavors out there now, and they all kind of work exactly the same way. So this is also a Weatherby Mark V. Market is in 338.6. 338.6 is
That's why, because I had my Browning A-Bolt 6.5 Creed.
Yep.
But you talk about this one all the time, and I thought maybe talking about it might help you use it someday.
Yeah. Factory gun, by the way. So factory gun.
Let's talk it out.
Chambered in 338.6 A square. Maybe we'll do a cartridge talk. It's a lead balloon. I have, over the past couple of years, began migrating my ring solutions from Picatinny as standard to direct-to-receiver mounts. Now, some people be like, that's because they're better, because you're eliminating a failure point. I do not believe that is the case.
No.
You're eliminating a failure point?
Yeah, because we're now, you've got your rail clamped to your gun, your ring clamped to your rail. There's another failure point in there.
Less things.
Yeah. I don't think that's the case. And I'll make that statement in having fired tens of thousands of rounds on top of Picatinny rails on calibers ranging from 22 LR to 50 Browning machine gun. And when I look at like Barrett M107s, when I look at Accuracy International guns chambered in 300 Norma, 338 Norma, I mean, they beat the tar.
It's a little silly to say that's yeah.
So I don't think a system like a Tally or a Hawkins or a Leopold direct-to-receiver mount is inherently better because I'm eliminating a failure point. Or at least that's not my reason for selecting them. My reason for selecting these personally is twofold. Number one is placement of the optic. So I do eliminate the additional height that I would get in a Picatinny rail right off the bat. So even if I took some of the lowest Picatinny or Weaver compatible rings and I put them on that Picatinny rail, I'm still going to end up like 2 to 3 tenths higher in presentation at the lowest than I would with a Tally on this rifle. And
you're going low for not the sake of what some people would say you need to go. Some people are, you got to get that thing low, man. You got to get that thing.
Oh, because it's,
you don't want to be able to fit a piece of paper between your scope and that barrel, man.
It's just fitment.
Yeah.
That's it.
This is because this is what works best with your facial structure, where your eye is, your overall bone structure of like length of pull, all that stuff. That
oftentimes works well for like your more traditional hunting rifle comb heights.
Yeah, usually has a lower comb height. So that is why you're referring to wanting it a little bit lower. Yes.
Now, Jim, I think what people could be experiencing from an accuracy standpoint is with the scope lower and a more proper cheek weld and the system overall functioning optimally for that person results in accuracy.
Yes.
But like if you just put like the whole system in like some sort of vise that held I'm not saying put your gun in a gun vise.
If you put this scope on peak under sights where your scope is now atop telephone poles and you're trying to rest your chin on the stock, then yes. So in that point, by going lower, you would be likely shooting better. And so then people could
it's more accurate if you do it
simply
this
for just
way.
the lower you go, the more accurate you get. That's not the case. It's actually just the fact that you fit the gun better.
Yeah.
Yes.
So fitment is my number one reason for doing these things. And then weight. So these rings are about 2.5 ounces a pair. So they add such a negligible amount of weight to my system that like a single loaded cartridge is approaching or exceeding that depending on the cartridge that I'm running.
It's an elegant look.
Yeah, they do look nice.
They look nice.
Yeah. For me, really, more than anything, is fitment and weight.
I agree.
Challenges with them, though, as we had talked about earlier with Weaver systems in a two-piece, if your rifle has any runout with respect to the relationship of rear bridge holes versus front bridge holes, or if those rings have any runout, you have no leniency. Like you are immediately addressing those rings. And by that I mean you're lapping them, or you're finding that, nope, that's a non-workable solution. And so I've got a pile of rigs set up in nearly identical fashion. Viper HS 2.5 to 10, set of tally lows or mediums depending on the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And every single one of them, I have dressed those rings.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of them. And that's fine. I'm happy to do it. It's like not a bad thing. It's almost an expectation for me. Like nothing mechanical is perfect. And people built them. So those little nuances I can sort out with the lapping bar in 15 to 20 minutes of time. And yeah, so great for presentation of optic. Great for saving weight. Aesthetically, some people may find these more attractive. I do not believe they really give you a really more reliable solution, perhaps. And you may have to pay attention to alignments of the gun translating into the ring, or alignments of the rings translating to fitment error that you may have to lap out. They are very clever. They're very simple. They're a great way to go. These tallies, for instance, are quite reasonable, actually. That you can get some very expensive direct receiver fit mounts. I mean, you can pay $200+ for them if you really want to.
Mm-hmm.
But these work just dandy, I think. Not much to say about them otherwise. They are perfect for you if you fit them. They are not perfect for you if you don't. They are probably the most limiting solution out there. And you really need to know your optic geometry and dimensions relative to the rifle to make sure that you nail the fitment. So if you order a set of lows and you actually need a medium, well, you're starting over.
Mm-hmm.
So with a Picatinny rail, having a little bit of height gives you cushion, and you can accommodate it with like a cheek piece or maybe you change your hold. I don't really recommend doing that. I'd rather you have the rifle meet you rather than you meet the rifle. So these do have an asterisk behind them as being an excellent choice, but asterisk, a bit of risk. And really it just comes down to fitment and dimensions. But you can get that sorted out with a little bit of homework.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've got a handful of rifles that, that was the optimal solution with, kind of like whatever the contingencies or, things that you noted there. And for me also, it just came down to fitment, cheek weld, things like that.
Yeah.
Anything else on direct to receiver mounts?
Well, these are kind of in the category, but also not.
Well, let's segue right away. Wait, before we segue.
Before we segue.
Things that are not on this table are rifles that have integrated dovetails. So
like Slinging
I should have
Rick's,
brought
like Slinging Rick's M77.
Yep. So if you have, we'll start on the rimfire side of things, like a CZ 452, 453, 455, 457, Marlin Model 60, Savage Mark IIs that are fairly early. Any of the rimfires that have the dovetail groove cut into the receiver itself. Those are generally 11, 12 millimeter or 3/8 inch dovetail standards. There are rings that fit those. Kind of a old way of doing things. You don't see that much anymore except for European rimfire guns and a few classic lines from some American rimfire manufacturers.
Tikkas have a provision for something
they
like
do,
that, right?
Yep. Tikkas do. That'll fit the Optolock base from Tikka and Sako.
Do Ruger bolt guns still have that?
They do. Yep. Model 77 specifically have. It's a different way of doing it. So like 77s, Mini 14s, Mini 30s, the 77 357, 77 44, and then the Super Blackhawk and Super Red Hawk series revolvers have these islands, I call them, on the wheel guns. It's on the top, like the bridge or the strap. Excuse me. On the rifles, it's on the bridges. they use a proprietary ring system that clamps onto a narrow island. And I don't understand why these days. At one time it was a very easy way. Ruger sent rings with the guns. It's a cool thing. It's unique to Ruger. But nowadays, let's say you had a Model 77 chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor, which they make, a long-range gun, and you want to put a 34 millimeter Venom 5-25 on it, and you expressed intent is long-range shooting. You got to do a little bit of backflipping to get 34 millimeter Ruger compatible rings. Same thing with a Dovetail direct solution. So, say a CZ 457. If you didn't put, say, an Area 419 or an EGW Picatinny rail on there, and you wanted to go right to the receiver, you'd have to find very specifically rings that will fit the CZ's Dovetail and 34 millimeter, and that's tough, or it can be depending. And so, those are kind of left over from years gone by, or they were carried over attempts at something potentially unique and a breakthrough thing, but they're not. I don't know. Dovetail fitment is not ideal, and sometimes it's the only way you can go. Especially on more classic guns, Tika, for instance, and Sako, less so now on the new Sakos, but on the 85, on the 75, and the series guns, they would have had the Optilock bases, a neat design, or the Sako tapered Dovetail, and you were very limited to, on a 75, for instance. That was your choice, or a series gun. You would limited to that. You'd have to get that base system, and you're going to make concessions. Thankfully, most of those guns can now take an adapter that'll bring us from 11 millimeter, 12 millimeter, 3/8 inch to Picatinny, or from 16 millimeter to Picatinny, or there's even a Ruger to Picatinny, which we have on Rick's gun.
Well, it's been off and on.
Is he back off that now?
He doesn't like the height that it added.
Which is true. Yep.
What's he got on it now then?
I think he went back to the Ruger rings. I don't know what scope he's got on it. But I know that he was having issues with the fact the Picatinny.
Yeah.
It adds notable height.
Yeah, probably 7/10.
Yeah.
6/10.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, not ideal.
And Slingin' Rick really likes to. He
likes to sling.
He's an offhand snapshot kind of guy, and if that scope doesn't present the way that he wants it, he's got a problem.
You can watch Rick's fantastic turn bolt handling.
You know what? He would be a better rightful owner of my Lee Enfield, because I bet him in a Mad Minute would be he would contest. He would contest any Brit in the Mad Minute.
If you want to see some fast bolt work, go to the Vortex Nation YouTube channel and watch Slingin' Rick shoot a Sitka Blacktail numerous times in short order.
When I saw that video for the first time, you and I were in a hotel room. I don't know where we were, and we got to that point, and I thought, how many times did he get that gun off total control, hit that deer every single time right in the pocket?
I think I was there, and I think I verbalized. I'm like, Rick, he's done.
Rick was,
because I wanted to shoot one too. I'm like, are you done yet? He's had enough.
He was seeing red.
Oh, he was seeing red. He was
nothing to chance.
Then
I finally got my turn and got one too. It was great.
Well,
what do you got there, Jay?
Well, this is a version of what you have there.
Because I've got a set of signature Z's. Is that what those are?
These are standards. Okay. That's a signature, not a Z.
Oh, this isn't?
Correct.
What is this?
It's a signature standard.
But it's got the things in it.
It does. That's the signature designation. Z's specifically fit Weaver or Picatinny.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Hey, real quick, I don't think we mentioned, since we plugged that video, we should probably say what video it was. It was Alders to Alpine.
Thank you.
Alaska Blacktail Bonanza, I think, is that the title? It's something titled like that. Sitka Blacktails on Kodiak. It was great.
In there.
Bonanza.
It was a Bonanza.
Bonanza.
Another good show. We've mentioned 2 good movies and a good show. Bonanza television show.
Yeah, I used to watch that when I was sick from school.
Yeah, that would be one that was on every summer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Of course, you were talking about being school. Maybe it's just on all the time.
I think so. Channel 45 back in Minnesota.
Okay.
Public television.
Disney Channel in these.
Was it?
So go into what you were just saying.
Okay. So the next one on here that I still commonly see, but unfortunately is getting less common, is what is known as standard, which I just love because at one point in time, this was it. And so common was it that it was called standard. And these days, and I don't want to say anything about people my generation, but on the whole, a lot of times we'll have a gun come in mounted in a set of standards, or we'll have a customer call in. They bring it to a gun shop. They get a young, enthusiastic person behind the gun shop, and they have a set of standards on their gun. Typically, the gun's going to be a bit older. Mm-hmm. And they look at this, and they go, what is this? And they have no idea how to put these things together, or they're, I would say, easier to do wrong than right. And these are, I think, really, really novel rings and bases. They're, I think, aesthetically pleasing. They're very attractive. They look
good, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But more importantly, they're spectacularly functional. They really do accomplish a nifty thing. And I used to run these exclusively too on a lot of different rifles, just Leopold standards. And Redfield made a set of these. Burris made a set of these. I think Pacific made a set of them. There's a lot of different companies that made standard style rings and bases. And because they were so common, Mark, can I take one of these screws out? Do you care?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So why these are cool is because, and
Can we see what you're doing there too?
So this is a one-piece system. They make them in two-piece too. We've got some two pieces up on the table there. The front ring looks toolless. You don't see any fasteners coming through the base or anything like that. To the eye, it just looks like as if the front ring is part of the base assembly up front. On the rear, we have a large drum screw on either side. And what these are windage adjustable screws. Now, this is an older mount. This is probably, an 80s vintage mount. I would imagine 80s to 90s.
I mean, I think so we talked a little bit about your 338 .6. This is my Browning BAR Mark II Safari in 30-06 that I think I bought in 97.
Okay. So the base system is prior to Leopold changing the drum screw to a Torx head, and it's actually a dual driver now. It's a flat blade and Torx head, which notable upgrade. These drum screws on the rear clamp the rear ring in place, but also drive it left or right and physically pivot the scope left or right.
Mm-hmm.
And
very cool feature when used properly. Very frustrating feature for some when they don't understand that that's what's happening.
And that's kind of what I meant by maybe folks not knowing how they work. And if you set them up wrong, you're going to have a hell of a time getting your scope zeroed, and you may not be able to get your scope zeroed. And the reason for it is the system will separates super simple.
Cool.
But basically, you put the scope in there, you bayonet in that front dovetail. The drum screws fishtail that optic. I hope I'm pointing at a camera, left or right, and you can make gross windage adjustments using the base screws and not having to touch your turret.
This was come up with back in the day when turrets really weren't that reliable.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like they weren't made the way that they are today, and you couldn't necessarily rely on them to track very well. Once people got their Riflescope sighted in, it was sacrilege to mess with those turrets.
Oh, no
like
touchy.
To sit there and goof around with them and click them around. It was like, ugh.
I remember when I saw the first person I saw like dialing their scope. That would have been, I don't know, it was back when I was in my Cabela's days.
Yeah.
And I literally thought he was insane. I'm like, you have a good zero and you're doing that. You're an insane person.
Yeah.
Well, and now it's like you got guys that sit downstairs with their Riflescopes and they literally hold onto the turret and just like spin the scope around the turret and just watch it. And it's like, like if somebody was brought back from the dead from back in the day and saw that going on, they would probably like slap them across the face.
So these are still produced today, and they still do exactly the same thing they did when they came out, and it's debatable as to who pioneered them, because there are some old like European mounts, specifically German mounts, and I think Recknagel might have been one of the first ones that kind of did something similar to this, where you had a windage adjustment in the rear, and then you had a pivot component in the front and a 90-degree pivot where the scope is placed perpendicular to the rifle and then rotated in place. Now, somebody watching this is ultimately going to scream at me and say, like, you can't grab that scope like that and pivot it in that ring. Well, I put this gun together some time ago with Mark, and I've also put many of these together and understand that proper burnishing or lapping of the dovetail and lubrication is paramount for success. And the amount of
I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. The amount of force that I am putting on this scope ring and scope when I put it into that dovetail and pivot it is minor. I mean, it's supposed to be loose. It's not supposed to be tight when you put it in. When you get one of these out of the box, you got to like reef on that ring to get it to kind of burnish in. And we do all that ahead of time. You put the front ring in there and you work it back and forth. You can actually put lapidary compound on there and work it in too, and then lubricate it. So there's oil on there, and intentionally so. Just so when we put this in here, it doesn't drag and bend our scope tube in half, which of course wouldn't be good.
Yeah, like watching you do that, it's not like you're putting undue force on that.
I mean, you're doing it with your pinky finger.
Yeah, I mean it's not much at all.
I saw him do it with his pinky finger before he started doing it with his pointer
now
finger.
doing it with my pinky.
Okay, it works both ways.
Yes, please confirm.
So
crystal clear to both the right and left.
So when you set this ring system up, you turn in the front ring, you roughly center it as best you can. You put the rear ring in between the two drum screws. I like to use a truing bar or a lapping bar that is supposed to be straight to try to indicate the two rings or align the two rings together. And I actually learned a neat trick many years ago from the guy who kind of gave me my first job in the industry. Nice sharp strike right in the middle of that lapping bar with a rubber mallet and snaps that ring in place and everything's good. And then I do a test fitment to make sure that the scope slides fore and aft in the rings without undue tension or pressure.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
You secure the rings as normal, and then you go to those drum screws in the rear and using either a manual bore sight where we've got the bolt out of the rifle, or in the case of the BAR, we'd pull the boss off and we'd put some sort of muzzle indicating bore sighting device on there. Make gross adjustments with the drum screws at the rear to pivot the scope left or right in order to make up our windage discrepancy.
I mean, why not, right?
Correct. It affords you a couple things. One, you don't have to use up tremendous amounts of windage adjustment in order to get zeroed.
Hey, keep your windage mechanically centered to get right, pretty close.
Two, if your rifle has discrepancies of alignment, which many rifles do, your rifle scope is perfectly aligned with your bore. And it's no longer a situation in which the rifle scope is not perfectly aligned. We're aligning the erector tube using the windage turret, which is fine. That's what the turrets are there for. It's a really neat way to do it. There's some caution in the setup, though. Like it's not hard. There's just things that you have to take into consideration when doing it. Turning the page back 3/4 of a century, when a lot of rifles were either like take a Winchester Model 54, for instance, or take back 1903s, take back German Mausers, etc. from World War II. A gunsmith puts 4 holes in the top of that receiver, or 3 holes in the top of that receiver to mount a rifle scope on. How well was he indicating relative to center line of bore? Potentially very poorly. A set of rings like this, a standard set, takes care of that discrepancy. And that's, I think, where their popularity really burgeoned, is because at that time there was a huge flood of Mauser 98s and 1903s and Sporterized 1917s on the marketplace that gunsmiths were putting together for shooters and hunters across the U.S. And they're super useful. And you can even kind of use this as a quick release thing. If you just pull one drum screw off, I like to Loctite one of the other drum screws once I've got everything sorted out. So my opposing side is off. You can pivot the optic off. You can put it back on. So
what kind of Loctite, Ryan?
Serviceable grade. So like a 242 is fine. Blue. You could, if you want to be bold, red, and then never amend it again. But I don't think that's a cool idea. So yeah, these are actually really novel. I think they're aesthetically very pleasing.
They are. They're really cool.
A little particular to set up, so don't jump into this one haphazardly. Like there's design intent with every bit and piece of a standard system, regardless of whose it is. And to make sure that it's done right is very important. Okay,
I like
Talk
it.
about some signatures.
Signatures. These are cool rings.
Because we were getting at some of this a little earlier when we were talking about 20 MOA rails and inducing cant to the Riflescope. So once again, the turrets, they manipulate the erector tube inside of the body of the scope that you see on the exterior. They're manipulating that thing called an erector tube that has the reticle in it. And so therefore they're actually changing essentially where the reticle is aimed, which then causes you to change where you point the barrel. There is a finite amount of travel inside of a Riflescope. There's only so much that it can account for, whether it is misalignments in the gun in order to just get you zeroed, or, in the case of like a 20 MOA rail, how much adjustment it has to allow you to shoot out to a certain distance with your given cartridge and rifle and distances and all that stuff. Now, people started playing around with changing the alignment of the scope itself on top of the rifle to try to avoid the need to use up the scope's internal adjustment to make up for misalignments. Especially in this case, these aren't used so much as like a tool to get you further. They're used primarily, it seems, as a tool to make up for misalignments in the gun, to get you zeroed, right?
Yes. So these are an example of Burris's signature series rings. Now, there's a signature is the key word here. They make signature standards, which is this. They make signature dual dovetail, which would be effectively two rings that had this style of dovetail on the bottom of them, front and rear. Those are odd. You'd really be selecting a dual dovetail system if only for aesthetics. Like functionally, they're not really going to get you much. They're strong. They're not going to walk, but they're very limiting, and they almost guarantee you need the signature series component to this. Did I say Z's already? Z's fit Weaver and Picatinny rails. Again, these are signature standards, so these fit standard style bases from Leopold or Burris or whoever else is building a Redfield standard style base. Their novelty comes from what are called posi-aligned shims that fit inside of the ring itself. I really wish I went to pull these apart because they're kind of a pain in the butt to put back together. These have them still in there. So when the inserts are in play, you really can't see them unless you're really looking close. And the inserts come either neutral, and the inside diameter of the circle created will be respective to your tube diameter, your Riflescope, or they come in increment, +5, +10, +15, +20.
Mm-hmm. The actual metal ring itself is overboard.
Yes.
So for a 1-inch Riflescope, it's actually the metal ring itself is bigger than 1 inch. It's the inserts that then constrict it down to being the proper size for the scope's tube. And then with that plus, with those different cants, you can actually customize sort of where it cants the rifle scope itself, right?
Yeah. And so I mentioned there's a 0, +5, +10, +15, +20. There's also a -5, -10, -15, -20. And using the rings, or excuse me, the inserts in the rings, you can, like as Jim had mentioned, the bore of the rings is larger than the diameter of the tube itself. So think about the amount of articulation that the scope could have off of a center axis, up, down, left, right, and then also at random angles other than our 90s, right?
Yeah.
You can shimmy these shims around on the inside of the rings, orienting them with plus or minus to square a scope up almost any direction.
Yep.
You can bias them 20 MOA. You can bias them 5 MOA. You can do all sorts of wild things. The first time I'd ever seen these used, and admittedly when I saw them I was like, this is the most Mickey Mouse thing I've ever seen in my life.
It looks a little weird.
Yeah. I'm like, you're telling me that I'm going to put some plastic rings or shims on the inside of my ring that articulate like a ball joint on my truck, and that thing's going to hold up to recoil? And I don't think so, Clark. And it was my hunting partner, and he had a CZ 550 Magnum. I think that one was either in 416 Rigby or 375 H&H. And he had a kind of at the time, premier low-powered variable rifle scope on there that had like 38 MOA of travel.
Oof.
And could not get the gun zeroed.
Not a lot there.
No. And so he put these signatures on there using the posi-aligned shims, biased the optic to the correct spot, both vertically and then left to right, and boop, done. Because that CZ's got like a 16 millimeter dovetail, and they're super and oddly specific. And so he used the right combination of systems on there to get all that into play. And he'd been using them on other guns for many years. And again, I was shocked because I saw these inserts and I thought, there's no way. And he's one of the more trustworthy and intelligent people I know. And when I saw him have it on a big gun, he's like, yep, nope, works fine. And that's it. Now sold.
I've run and fussed with every one of the variants that we have on the table here.
Yep.
This is one that I've never used before.
Have you never done it?
No, and not because I think it's bad. I think my initial impression of it was like, you got to be kidding me. Then you hear people talk about it, like, oh yeah, that's super functional, useful. I like those. How do you know? Is it just trial and error, or how do you know? Like, oh, I need to
add this,
subtract
sure.
that.
So what I like to do, so you like when I'm going to recommend one of these to a customer is here's a great example, Savage 220 slug gun. They're putting a standard hunting optic on there, so something around a 45 to 55 MOA travel range, and they are still running out of adjustment because of alignments with the gun. This specific scenario has come up. Your choices are, at that juncture, is to get a scope with more adjustment, which maybe that is the answer, right? And it works, depending on how the alignment is. Or we pursue a set of signature Z-rings on top of that rail. What I like to do when I get the gun in hand is map the alignments. So if I'm on the range with that rifle and I pull the trigger, and I've got an optically centered rifle scope, and I've got a big target board at 50 yards. I pull the trigger, boop, I see my impact on paper. I know where my intended point of impact is, or my POA. I adjust the optic to whatever it takes to get on target, and I record that amount. And then now I have kind of a three-dimensional map of like what this rifle's alignments are bearing from like an adjustment requirement in the system. And then we can figure, okay, I would have to come up 10 MOA and I would have to come right 10 MOA. And I'm going to move these shims in there in increment using their little chart there. It shows you how much they got to the correct position and get it, if not perfect, as close as I can so I don't have to exhaust adjustments. Jim and I put together a Springfield Scout Squad, or SOCOM yesterday. Jim Jordan.
Other
Gotcha.
Jim.
Yeah, other Jim.
I'm Jimmy.
But
not to you. You stuck with the Jim.
You've always been Jim to me.
I know.
And
okay.
That particular gun, we put a Crossfire 2.7 Scout on it. That particular gun, it's pretty common to see that they require a fair amount of windage adjustment in order to get centered up. And in talking to the gentleman, we got the gun zeroed, and we had room to spare. A caveat, we said, hey, if you feel that you want more adjustment in this system and you do want to run this scope, there's a very simple solution. It's found with a set of Burris Signature Series rings, the Z's specifically. They're going to go right onto your Picatinny rail. You're going to put the bias side neutral, opposing the direction of requirement adjustment, the bias side positive. On the side of adjustment requirement, you're going to push the scope over. It's going to nestle in those rings. You're going to gain back that amount of travel, and you're on target. And they are a super clever solution for the shooter that's got a rifle that's giving you a little bit of fits from an alignment standpoint.
Doesn't mean the rifle's bad.
No.
Many of these rifles shoot like a house of fire very accurately, very repeatable, but there's misalignments.
Little gremlins, and it's not uncommon. It's more common than it's uncommon. And in doing that, yes, you get your rifle aligned. I also think these are kind of neat because they do put a little kind of buffer of protection between your scope tube and your scope ring. And I think a good set of rings, and especially especially a good set of rings, if it needed to be lapped and dressed up and kind of concentricized a bit, you shouldn't be crushing your tube in the first place if you're following torque procedures. But it's just a nice little protective barrier between the scope tube and the ring body. You're going to get a mark either way, but it's kind of neat how they work. And they work. I mean, they're really cool. It's not super frequent that I'm going to have a customer that needs something like this, but boy, when they do, they come in clutch. Mm-hmm. Like that is the saving grace for some systems that aren't otherwise adaptable to like a Leopold windage style or standard style base. If they don't make it to fit that particular firearm, and we'll probably a dozen or so times a year call these things out as like the best viable solution for a shooter. And like I said, they fit a number of different ways. You can get them in the Z configuration to fit weavers or Picatinnies or the standard or dual dovetail. I think they make I don't think they make a QR version anymore, but really neat.
Cool stuff.
That is cool stuff.
That's pretty much it for commonly found mounting solutions.
A lot of different ways to stick your scope to your gun, and whatever way you do it, it is profoundly important, though, to the performance of your setup down the line. It's the most boring part.
Oh, I love it.
But you love it.
I do. My favorite.
It's so boring.
My favorite thing, honest to goodness.
I'm not trying to lie to people and tell
That's
them
like
that
the
it's
last
exciting.
piece of the puzzle.
My favorite thing is the build, man. Putting it all together, making sure the fit is perfect. Everything's like well secured.
Is the idea.
Aligned.
After that, you're bored and then just go get another one.
I'm serious. Like, I love taking that rifle, dressing those holes up, cleaning them, putting the rings on, securing everything down, checking this, checking that, lapping.
That's why I bring my stuff
So when
to
someone's
you,
like, what's your favorite part about this gun? You say, the rings.
Well, the gun,
base.
no, I mean, I guess the process, right? I take an innate amount
Well, it's a cool part of the process, making it come to life by getting the scope on top. But let's be honest, when you're shopping around for things on GunBroker, I know all the tabs open on your computer right now are guns and not rings. Well, you guys usually actually have something open on your computers about bases or rings due to customer questions that come in. But not your personal.
Once I get the gun, which I love,
yes,
I love putting it all together.
Yeah, that's why. That's why I drop all my stuff off at Ryan's desk, because I know how much he loves it, and I would be depriving him of that joy.
That's really nice of you.
Yeah, I'm a giver. Oftentimes I don't give much time though. Hey,
need this tomorrow.
Thanks, Mark.
It's 5. It's 4:40.
I know it's. I know it's
5.
I know it's 5 p.m. I got a trip of a lifetime coming up. No, not generally that bad.
When was the last time it wasn't that bad?
I am curious. When was the last time it wasn't that bad?
I don't think when we got that Tika set up the other
4:52.
time, that wasn't that bad.
Ryan, my flight to Alaska leaves tomorrow at 6:50 a.m.
It's never that bad.
I'll say this.
He just said he
Mark
used the N-word, the never word.
He was on vacation last week, And
I just made him so nervous.
I know. He was on vacation last week, and the week prior, Friday. Hey,
okay, that was different.
like
whatever situation he came up with, it doesn't matter. You would have said, "No, that was different."
I'm going to be out of the office all next week.
That wasn't.
Yes.
We kind of have to have these done for Monday of the following week. So if you could
just
have fun.
Hey,
but that was
I know you love this.
That was with a little bit more than a week cushion.
That's true.
So it wasn't the day before. I didn't call you on Sunday and say, hey, I'm out of the office. By the way, can you do this? It was like, I didn't get a chance to have you do this before I left.
It's never a 5-alarm fire for me. The last build that I did for him was his Tika before he went elk hunting with it. And his words before we shot the rifle, he's like, man, I just need a win with this one. I really just need a win with this one.
Just got to have one.
And I think you had about 2 weeks before the hunt.
I'm trying to think of what I was using a new scope, and I was waiting on. I'd gotten the rifle, and I was waiting on the scope. So we got the scope kind of at the last minute. It was kind of like a prototype thing.
That does happen.
And so that was what induced somewhat of a time constraint. And it was a new rifle. And I think I willed that one into work because, I mean...
I don't think you willed anything to work.
What do you think, Mark, comes to you more as a result of? Ammo questions, issues, concerns.
That happened today.
Mounting solution questions, issues, concerns. Gun
2 weeks ago.
Mounting issues, questions, concerns.
Hold on. These are... I think concerns is the wrong...
Curiosities.
Well, that's questions. Like, let's rap about stuff. What do you think about this cartridge? You know, you planted that...
Well, but there's...
You planted that...
Sometimes it is a mark coming down and saying, I just don't know about this one, Ryan. I just don't... Would you mind...
That's not untrue.
Well, there have been times where I'm experiencing something that I can't ferret out. Like I'm having some sort of accuracy. Right. And then I want to validate that it is not, in fact, me shooting the rifle. And I'd say more often than not, we figure out what it is.
You're a fan of the scientific method, and with every scientific method involves a control.
There you go.
Ryan is the control.
He is the control.
My favorite thing, though, is I do things...
The liquor's in control now.
Yeah, I do things fairly brutishly sometimes in front of Mark intentionally.
Just to throw him off a little bit.
Dude, hey, take it easy, okay?
Everybody calm down.
Yeah, and I do that just to
Sure, you should be doing it that way?
Yeah. It's like when I do recoil lug pocket seating. Just take his brand new gun, slam it on the ground. And Mark, it's fine. Like I said, I really enjoy mounting scopes up. I love seeing it come to fruition. I love knowing now that I've mounted enough scopes for you that 99% of the time I hand you the gun, you go, it's right there, baby.
That's why I should do it. I should do it myself. Baby. I should do it myself. You know, learn to fish. But I just, you've done so many and you do it so often. You're doing it daily. You're just all, you know what I mean?
Teach a Mark to mount a scope. Feed his anxiety for a year. Mount a scope for Mark. Feed him for a lifetime.
Something like that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it, Boardman.
It's like that part of There's Something About Mary. I have to learn to do this myself when he's picking up the keys. That's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, you need to.
That's that's the most quoted movie by Mark Boardman.
That's a good one. If you haven't seen it, because it's an oldie, but I think it's a classic. And kids these days, Jim, they haven't seen that one. Don't even know about it.
It's true. They don't even know it exists.
Shame. Next gun I get, I'll mount the damn scope on it.
We have a lot of... I feel like the last couple of episodes we've done, there's been sort of like an ultimatum for Mark. I mean, it was like we were trying to figure out a date for when he's going to get his suppressor. Next scope he gets, he's going to do the mounting procedure himself. Like, what else are we going to...
I can mount a rifle scope. I know how to do it. I just know you're going to do it better.
What you're doing at this point... I
feel like you're going to do it better.
You're just using the podcast audience to hold you accountable for things. By just publicly blurting things out.
I do use the podcast as like a form of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if I say this out loud in front of other people, then...
It has to happen.
Yeah.
You know what's crazy?
Ryan likes to do that because he'll say 10 likes.
The whole audience is now your ally.
There's a lot of people out there that listen to us.
It's not just like onesie-twosie anymore. No. It's weird.
It's pretty cool, man.
It's almost a little creepy, actually, every time we talk about it. I just like to...
It's fun.
I wish we could
like to pretend I'm just talking with my friends.
A big auditorium with a big campfire in the middle. And we just pick questions.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
I don't know. Might ruin it for me. I get real nervous.
Well, the campfire?
Yeah, it's a big auditorium, though. What auditorium is going to let us light a campfire in the middle of it?
I don't think any of them. But
it's better.
Well, that's more of like a ask for forgiveness sort of thing.
That's true.
10 likes. Mark will find us an auditorium.
10 likes.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Ryan, for mounting up so many of my rifle scopes over the years.
It's my pleasure, Mark.
Yeah, hopefully this proved to be helpful. There's a lot. We covered a lot of different rings, mounts, mounting solutions here. All have their place.
Yep.
All might be optimal for, or some might be more optimal for your build, your facial structure, the firearm itself. Even like we said, aesthetically, that can come into play. So all sorts of variables there. So yeah, hopefully this was helpful. This was a fun one, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See ya.
Bye.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.